All right, so in this tutorial, we are going to take a big, long audiobook file that's just all one file, and we're going to use Audacity to separate it out into a bunch of smaller files that correspond to the chapters of the audiobook. So I've already imported my audiobook file, but you can either use open or find your track and just drag and drop it in. And it should be noted that this won't work if you have your file in M4B format. You will need to convert it first to MP3, and you can use a file conversion software such as FFmpeg is what I use, but that's a bit beyond the scope of this tutorial. But just know that you will need to convert it from M4B first in order to do this. So we have ours already in MP3, already imported. What we're going to do is we're going to use these labels. This is a label track, and this is going to let us, upon export, split this file into a bunch of different files based on these labels. Okay, so the question is, how do we get these labels? How do we get them in the right space, which is at the start of every new chapter? Well, what we're going to do is we're going to use this, it used to be called Sound Picker. Now it's just called Label Sounds under the Analyze menu. We're going to do that to find the silence that happens at the beginning of each new chapter. Okay. Usually in an audiobook, there's a pause before each chapter that's longer than any other pause that's happening throughout the book. And the only real trick here is trying to figure out what the length of time is for each chapter, for that silence that happens in between each chapter. Now, sometimes you can get lucky and you can just go to the very beginning of the audiobook holding control and using the scroll wheel to scroll in here. You can also use the magnifying glass tool up here. So you can see usually at the beginning of an audiobook, you might find an intro and then the start of chapter 1. I'm going to hit spacebar to play 1. So as you can see, we do have chapter 1 here. And so what you could do is scroll in, and then we'll just select this little section here. And then we're going to get, if you look down here at the bottom, it will say the duration of this selection. If you don't see, if this number isn't looking right to you, hit the cog and choose start and length of selection. Okay, now, so in this case, I'm getting about 2.8 seconds. Now, I happen to know that that time of this silence for this very first chapter is shorter than the silence for all the other chapters. So scroll out here, go to one of my labels that I already have. So for instance, this one, for chapter 2, you can see it's over 3.5 seconds. And that's pretty much how all the rest of the chapters are. So there is a little bit of a trick of finding this number. So we're going to go, I'm just going to exit out this track, and we're going to make a new one. Oops, got to select the track first. So click here to select it or hit Ctrl+A. We'll analyze label sounds. We'll get this input box here. All right, so this is the number that you want to, that you're focusing on, the minimum silence duration. And so for mine, I ended up using 3.5 seconds is what I found to be the best time. If I used that 2.8 seconds of that very first track, it ended up picking a few random spots throughout the book that did not correspond to chapters. And if you pick a larger number, like if I picked 4 or 5, then it pretty much, there isn't any pauses that are that long, and you just get one label for the whole track, and that doesn't do you any good. And so what you can kind of do, I think the best way to do it is to just start at a number like 5. And if that doesn't give you the intended result, just start going down by a second or a half-second increment until you're getting results that look like they would be the, expected amount of chapters for your book. And then, so we'll just leave the minimum label interval at this fraction of a second. This is the smallest it lets you choose. For label type, point after sound, just leave this at 0. And then for the label text, I like to start at chapter 2, and I'll tell you why in a little bit. And for this number, or for this words, you can, you can have nothing, you can have title, you can have track, you can have chapter. And that's just going to be, it's going to label each chapter as chapter 1, chapter 2, chapter 3, and so on. You can go in later and change those to give each one a discrete name, but for us, we're just going to do chapter will be fine. So we'll click apply, and We'll let it analyze, and this usually goes pretty quickly. All right, so zoom out here. We've got a bunch of chapters. So what you can do now is go through and make sure that you're actually getting the right labels in the right place. So check for this one. Two. All right, so that's right. We can go through and check all these, or you can just check random ones. We'll check this one. 1, 2. Very good. And usually at the end, there'll be a little bit of cleanup to do. So you can see there's an outro, and you don't really want to have a separate, a separate file for these last few, this last little part here. You can see it's only about 38 seconds long. So what I'm going to do is I'll just right click on the name here, and we'll just get rid of these last little chapters. No need to keep those around. All right, so now go back to the very beginning, and we'll scroll in, zoom in, I should say, the very beginning here. We want to add another label at the very beginning, since we skipped that in our first one because we knew that this length was going to be too short. And also, we have this little introduction here, which you may want to leave out, which you can either just highlight this and press delete to delete it, or Control-Z to get back, or you could just put a new label right here. But I'm going to keep this in. And so what I'm going to do is just click down here and hit Control-B on the keyboard. Now we've added a new label here. And I'll just name this for chapter 01. All right, so you can of course go through and rename each chapter or check on each chapter, make sure it lines up correctly. But when you finish doing all that, we'll go File, Export Audio, and here you can choose name, location, file type, and the thing that we are using here to export our files, the important piece is this labels. Having this, we'll let it export each chapter into its own file based on the label. And you can also choose to edit metadata if you want to go through and edit the metadata for each file as it exports. But other than that, you just hit export, and then you should have your folder filled with all your new files. And if you want to convert, these will be in MP3 format or whatever format you choose here. But if you do want to convert them back to M4B, you will need to use another piece of software like Audiobook Converter. I will leave a link in the description to one of those converters. But other than that, that pretty much sums it up. So I hope you enjoyed this tutorial and hope you have a great day.